Well, I have 9:30. You still have people joining online. I can see we're not going to have a quorum in the room today, but we do have a significant number of people participating online, and I don't think it's going to prevent us from doing what we need to do today to not have a quorum in the room. I guess one of the things that we're going to need to put on the next TAC agenda, and I can't really call this meeting to order because there is no meeting, but because there's no quorum, but we will proceed with our regularly scheduled agenda items. If you recall, the TAC recently appointed a new chairperson, Brendan McDowell from Manchester. And just as soon as we did that, Brendan took a job with the State Office of Planning and Development. So Brendan is now working for our friends at the state OPD office. So we will need to appoint a new chair of the TAC at our next meeting, presumably when we have a quorum in the room. And it is still technically Manchester's turn in the rotation to do that. So Maggie, maybe you could talk internally and see who may be willing to do that on behalf of the city. And we can cross that bridge when we come to it at the next meeting. But for today, let's see, we still don't have. No, we still do not have a quorum in the room. So, but nevertheless, we do have a significant number of people between those of us in the room and participating online. So I will, let's go around the room with and online with brief introductions. I will start with you, Tracy.
Tracy Whitehead, MTA CART with the Cunard Francistown.
Zach Swift with the commission. Greg McGregor, Town of Hooksett. Ben Herbert, Regional Village Manager.
Maggie Baldwin, Manchester DPW.
James Mayo, Southern New Hampshire Planning.
Adam Lasney with the commission.
Nate Miller with the commission, and I will go around the room in the order that I see everyone on our screen here. Suzanne.
Suzanne Neighbor with the commission.
Liz.
Liz Robidoux, Town of Derry.
Matt.
Hi, good morning. Matt Watkins with the Nashua Regional Planning Commission.
Andrew.
Andrew Haddock, Town of Chester.
Vincent.
Vincent Pagano, Central New Hampshire Regional Planning Commission.
Lucy.
Lucy St. John, New Hampshire DOT. Good morning, everyone.
Kristen.
Hi, Kristen Clark, City of Manchester DPW.
Lee.
Good morning, Lee Levine, Federal Highway Administration.
Mark.
Mark Sunan, Town of New Boston.
Jack.
Morning, Jack Wade, New Hampshire DES.
Cam.
Morning all, Cam Perlman, Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission.
Have I missed anyone online? Hearing none.
I don't believe so.
All right. Let's dive into our agenda. I don't have the agenda in front of me. Is the 10-year plan item the first item on the agenda? Okay.
Yes.
I will pull that up and we will embark on the 10-year plan. Can everyone see this in full screen mode online?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Okay, so lots to cover today on the 10-year plan, and we will go into depth in a variety of different ways here in the 10-year plan, but we'll start with an overview. So for those of you who may be new, Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission, all of the regional planning commissions around the state of New Hampshire work collaboratively with our colleagues at New Hampshire DOT on the development of the 10-year transportation improvement plan. We do this under two state laws, RSA 22899 and RSA 240. We have recently finished the previous 10-year plan. It was signed into law by the governor in early August. That was the 2025 to 2034 10-year plan. And so now we are embarking on the process to develop the next 10-year plan, which is the 2027 to 2036 10-year plan. I show this slide a lot because we talk about a lot of different transportation plans here at the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission. We have a long-range plan, what we call our Metropolitan Transportation Plan, that goes out 20 years. That is a federal requirement. And then unique to New Hampshire is this mid-range plan, what we call the 10-year plan. That is a state requirement under state laws I just mentioned. And once a project advances into the 10-year plan, it is considered a state level funding commitment for that project. So the project is officially programmed when it makes its way into the 10-year plan, at least as far as the state of New Hampshire is concerned. And then, of course, we have our TIP, our Transportation Improvement Program, which is a federal requirement. It covers a 4-year period. By and large, the TIP is essentially the first 4 years of the 10-year plan in New Hampshire. These are the projects that are closest to construction. They've been making their way through engineering, and it's a 4-year document, the TIP. So we kind of flow from concept to construction through the long range plan, into the 10-year plan, and into the TIP. So looking at this current 10-year plan, as with pretty much generally the case with the 10-year plan, the projects that we would be programming in this 10-year plan update go to the back of the line in the 10-year plan. So the projects that we are adding in this 10-year plan cycle are going to be programmed generally in either fiscal year 2035 or fiscal year 2036. The funding that supports the 10-year plan is generally federal, and there are different pots of federal funding, but in general, when we're talking about programming 10-year plan projects, the funding that is going to support the implementation of those projects is generally federal. And so most projects need to be on federal aid eligible infrastructure. If a proposed project would be locally managed on locally controlled infrastructure, a 20% local match is required. And that covers most of the bike ped sorts of projects, the bicycle and pedestrian types of projects, rail trail projects, bicycle lane projects. Those, generally speaking, are locally managed projects that require a 20% local match. If there is a proposed project on state managed infrastructure, that would be a state managed project. The state matches those projects with toll credits. So there's a different matching mechanism for state managed projects than local managed projects. Each region of the state is provided an allocation of funding based on our respective shares of population and federal aid eligible lane mileage. So here at the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission, we expect our regional allocation to remain level with that of 2 years ago, which in our case is $10.56 million for the region in year of expenditure dollars. So that is 10.56 million essentially in 2035 or 2036 dollars. That's the spending power, therefore, when you consider an inflation rate, our assumed inflation rate of 3.7% per year, our actual spending power in today's money for that regional allocation is somewhere around $7.3 million in today's dollars, translating into 10.56 million in year of expenditure dollars after inflation is applied. For any state managed projects, we also need to take our base level cost estimate and add 10% to that right on the top before inflation is applied. for New Hampshire DOT's own agency indirect costs. Any questions so far before we dive into the projects? Evaluation criteria. We talked about this a couple of months ago at the TAC, if you recall. All 9 regional planning commissions use the same set of 15 criteria to evaluate 10-year plan projects. So we use the same criteria in our region that the North Country Council uses in their region. The difference is that each region weights those criteria individually to reflect their unique needs. So congestion criteria are higher weighted in our region than they are in the North Country region. Because we have different needs and different situations happening with our, I'm going to let Alex Mello in here. We have different needs for our region than other regions of the state. Let's see, lost that. There we go. So back in July, our MPO policy committee, based on the TAC's recommendation, adopted updated 10-year plan criteria for use in this current 10-year plan update. I'm not going to go, I don't expect everybody to read this slide. You may remember it from a couple of months ago when we went through this exercise, but we did adopt weightings. They were essentially the same weightings as 2 years ago with one change. We evenly split the equity and environmental justice criterion with the accessibility criterion to make those level. They were I think 7% and 3% or something like that before, and now they're both around 5.8%. So these are the criteria and the weightings that we will use to evaluate 10-year plan projects for regional priorities. I'm going to hide my floating meeting controls again. Let's see. Engineering review is required, and this has been the case for a number of years now. We assign all of the projects in the queue for 10-year plan consideration in our region to our on-call engineer. We went through a process earlier this year and what's called a qualifications-based selection process to select our on-call engineer to do project scoping and cost estimating for the 10-year plan, and we selected VHB as our on-call engineer. We have signed our contract with VHB, so VHB will be providing this assistance to us through June of 2026 for project scoping and cost estimating. Our schedule, we have completed our solicitation to the municipalities in the region, and we will hear about the projects that came in from that solicitation in a couple of minutes. And now we are in the process of undergoing engineering review and initial evaluation of those projects. So we'll talk about what those projects are. We are actively working with VHB as we speak on a task order to do the actual scoping and cost estimating memos for these projects. What are the projects? And I'm going to go in alphabetical order by municipality. And so we're going to start with Auburn as letter A. So Auburn has applied for a project to improve a skewed rail trail crossing of the Rockingham Rail Trail at New Hampshire Route 121. I've sort of showed that with this dashed arrow here. You can see it's a pretty skewed crossing. Based on some conversations with New Hampshire DOT staff, Mike O'Donnell and Bill Lambert and others, our initial assessment is that a rectangular rapid flashing beacon would be an appropriate first step for an improvement, and then we would see how effective the rapid flashing beacon is. But given that it's skewed, there are some notable examples from Pennsylvania where communities have gone above and beyond an RRFB for a skewed crossing. And so we are assigning this project to VHB to take a look at it and see if they concur with the RRFB recommendation, or if they think in their engineering judgment something beyond an RRFB is needed at this point. If it is just an RRFB that is an appropriate crossing improvement for that location, that would be a pretty small project. It would be probably in the $50,000 range or thereabouts. That would be pretty small as a standalone 10-year plan project. And it would be, I don't know that it would be prudent to wait for that type of low-hanging fruit type of improvement to fiscal 25 or fiscal 35 or 36 for construction. So given that, I have reached out to some colleagues at New Hampshire DOT to see if it ends up being an RRFB, if that's something we might be able to piggyback on through a highway safety improvement project or some other means that the state has to try to get a small project like that done sooner than waiting 10 years in the 10-year plan for what is a fairly potentially straightforward type of improvement there. Any questions yet? Okay. Bedford. This is a project that you may remember from 2 years ago. It is being resubmitted for consideration. This is the New Hampshire Route 101 corridor, in particular, a proposal to construct a multi-use path adjacent to 101 from Wallace Road to the Amherst Town line. Basically a 10-foot wide paved multi-use path from Wallace Road to the Amherst Town line. We did have VHB scope this project 2 years ago, so we're not starting from scratch here. But if you also recall 2 years ago, one of the projects that we added to the 10-year plan was a corridor study update for the Route 101 corridor study. More than 20 years ago now, there was a corridor study of the Route 101 corridor that proposed a 5-lane cross section through Bedford. Part of that to Wallace Road has been constructed. The remaining section from Wallace Road to the Amherst Town line, it's unclear whether or not a 5-lane cross section is both necessary or supported by the town of Bedford at this point. So a corridor study update is needed and has been programmed in the 10-year plan to figure out what the preferred layout is between the town of Bedford and New Hampshire DOT based on current conditions and future projections. Is it still a 5-lane cross section, or is it a 3-lane cross section that would be preferred in the future? So this project falls into a little bit of a chicken versus egg type of scenario, in that everybody recognizes the desire to have a multi-use path next to 101. At the same time, it's difficult to engineer or to scope that project from an engineering perspective, because you don't know what your constraint is, whether it's a 5-lane cross section or a 3-lane cross section. So there's a little bit of a chicken versus egg scenario there. We do know that in 2022, one of the key bridges in that segment, which is 101 over Pulpit Brook, was widened to 3 lanes with no accommodation for a potential multi-use path. So that makes it more challenging to potentially have a parallel structure to carry a multi-use path over Pulpit Brook in that location. So when we had VHB scope this project 2 years ago, their estimate was a little over $3 million, and DOT's review process, they thought the project was more north of $5 million, given some of the challenges and constraints. So we're going to have VHB update this scope and cost estimate, but as we go through this, it may be prudent to advocate to advance the 101 corridor study to get that completed as soon as possible, so that we have a layout that that can help inform what this design actually needs to be, because it is a challenge without having final consensus on what the layout of 101 in the future is going to be. A second proposal from Bedford is the replacement of a bridge on, I believe it's called Catesby Lane over McQuaid Brook. This is a local bridge on a local road, and we don't see a lot of these types of projects come in for 10-year plan consideration. Most of the time, these go into the state aid bridge program. This particular bridge was previously programmed. So it was a project that existed with state aid bridge funding. It was known as Project 218684. And due to another bridge, an emergent bridge failure in the town of Bedford, the funding that had previously been programmed for this bridge was reallocated to a different bridge. And so because of that, funding needs to be reprogrammed for this particular bridge. Again, in most cases, we would defer to the state aid bridge program to deal with local bridge projects like this. But after conferring with New Hampshire DOT, there is no current local bridge solicitation happening right now. But we have identified, looking at the criteria that we use to evaluate 10-year plan projects, this type of project would not, in all likelihood, emerge as a high regional priority, given the criteria that we have. But through conversations with our colleagues at DOT, we do think that it could be a candidate for a federal discretionary program called the PROTECT program. There are some hydrologic concerns with McQuaid Brook and the current layout of the bridge where overtopping might be an issue. And because of those hydrology considerations, it may be eligible for the PROTECT program, which is a federal infrastructure resilience program. And so at this point, I think what we're proposing to do is to have VHB scope and estimate the Catesby Lane Bridge project, and then use that scoping work potentially to work with the town as the basis of a PROTECT discretionary grant application in the next solicitation. So I don't know that, and you know, it's something that we would be looking for TAC feedback on, whether or not you want to carry this through the 10-year plan process. I don't think it would, based on the criteria, rank very highly. However, given that opportunity of an upcoming PROTECT program solicitation, that may be a more realistic path outside of the state aid bridge program to get this project funded sooner than later.
Too many programs.
Yes, there are many programs.
How do
Yes.
you like keep track of? I'm trying to. Is there a program? Is there a list somewhere?
There is a list.
Is there?
Yes, and Lee Levine is on the call today, and Lee has, when the IIJA, the current legislation, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, was first passed, we did have Lee give kind of an overview presentation about all of the various federal discretionary programs that were newly established in the IIJA. And maybe it would be good, Lee, if we could consider doing that again at some point, given that we do have some new TAC members and new MPO members. So Lee, I may be reaching out to you on that topic, because I think maybe a refresher on that would be good, because we do talk about these acronyms and these programs, and it is complicated. I do this for a living, and it's complicated to keep up with all of them. So.
Sure, be happy to do that.
Thanks, Lee. So moving on now, we've made it to H in the alphabet, and so we are in the town of Hooksett. And if you're familiar with the exit 11 area in Hooksett, what you see in this photo, those are the toll booths on the exit 11 ramps. So when you get off or on exit 11, you pass through those toll booths and you end up at this intersection with Hackett Hill Road. It's really a four-way intersection with Hackett Hill Road and the entrance to the exit 11 park and ride there. Hooksett has concerns, a number of concerns about this intersection. Congestion issues, safety issues, and sight distance issues. And if you've ever driven through this intersection, all three of those issues exist, particularly with sight distance. And so the town has applied for improvements to this intersection through the 10-year plan. They have left the door open. They say they're willing to consider either a roundabout solution or a signalized solution, whatever may make sense from an engineering perspective. So we are going to assign this project to VHB and ask them to do some analysis and give us their engineering judgment about what they think a preferred improvement would be here, whether it be a roundabout or some other type of improvement. So,
Question for you.
yeah.
There's a toll right there. Do you know if that's programmed to become an open toll at any point?
That's the ramp. So I don't know if, I'm not aware that there's an AET proposal for that particular ramp, although in the future it may be possible. But I don't know. I don't know if the exit 11 area is on the long-term plan for AET or not. I know the first step in AET in our region is going to be the Bedford Main Line Toll Plaza. I expect they won't do a lot with I-93 because of the existing open road tolling condition until that reaches the end of its useful life. But it's a good question. I don't know. I should say I'm not aware of any current plans to make that AET. Staying in Hooksett, a second project proposal from the town of Hooksett is for widening of US Route 3 from Legends Drive to Hunt Street. And there is a current US Route 3 widening project known as the 29611 project that is widening from Alice Avenue to Martins Ferry Road. And this would be the segment north of that, the next unimproved segment of Route 3 north of the 29611 project. So this is something that has been a priority for the Hooksett Town Council and is an area where they see, congestion issues. This is going to be a substantial project with potentially significant right-of-way impacts and by itself may exceed the regional allocation for this 10-year plan cycle. We do want to get a handle on what all of those considerations are and what the cost estimate would be. So we are assigning this to VHB for scoping and cost estimating. I am asking VHB to look very carefully at what phasing options may exist for that project. Is there a possibility of doing certain elements of this project earlier than other elements to make a more feasible sized project given our regional funding constraints? So we'll see what VHB comes back with for this project. The town of Londonderry on New Hampshire Route 102 between Young Road and High Range Road. This is an area that has a substantial crash history, including fatal crashes. It's a higher speed kind of transitional area of Route 102. It's tricky from a 10-year plan perspective because we don't really know what the potential improvements there are going to be. So we have worked with the town of Londonderry to apply for a road safety audit of this section of Route 102. New Hampshire DOT has told us, they haven't made any announcements yet, but they've told us that there's a very high likelihood that this RSA is going to be funded and approved in early 2025. so we have every reason to believe that this RSA is going to happen. The RSA, the road safety audit itself, will provide a means to work with state and local stakeholders. So emergency services, the fire and police departments, the planning department, the town manager, as well as the district engineer and folks in highway design at DOT, as well as the traffic bureau, to look at all of the safety issues on this particular segment of Route 102 and identify what the improvement needs would be. Whether those improvement needs are related to, speed limits or other factors, or whether they're related to infrastructure improvement needs, or both. And so it's hard for us to scope a project like this without having some background of what the RSA would yield. If we tried to scope a project like this right now, we would be presuming the conclusions of the RSA, which wouldn't be ideal. So I think our suggestion here is to defer action on this particular project until the RSA is completed. And once we have that RSA report, which will give us some improvement concepts, use those recommendations in the RSA report as the basis of a 10-year plan application in the next round. So that's sort of what I think our initial approach is going to be with 102 in Londonderry. There's a clear and obvious need here. It's just, I think, process-wise, it makes a lot of sense for the road safety audit to be completed before we try to put something in the 10-year plan, not knowing what those improvements would be yet. In Manchester, you may be familiar with this project because we have looked at it in the last couple of 10-year plan cycles. This is the Exit 8 and Wellington Road area in Manchester. You may recall that 2 years ago, we did add, it was our biggest project that we added into the 10-year plan in the last cycle, which was a phased version of this project, which we called intersection capacity improvements with limited bicycle lanes. So basically the Exit 8 ramp and Mammoth Road area, and then bicycle lanes kind of in this constrained kind of limit of the project. The vision is to have those bicycle lanes go to Lindstrom Lane, which is farther beyond this interchange. And so Manchester has applied for supplemental funding for this project to complete the remainder of that work, including the bicycle lanes to Lindstrom Lane. So we are assigning this project to VHB to update the scope and cost estimate to reflect current conditions. I think one thing to note, Maggie, is that we did have agreement for the initial portion of work that we put in, that would be toll credit matched because of the nexus to the interstate interchange there. I do expect that if and when we add funds to the project to expand the bicycle lanes further, that DOT would expect to see a local match for that portion of the project. So that's something that when DOT ultimately reviews this project, I do expect them to require a local match on whatever the delta may be. This may not be quite as heavy a lift as initially thought, because we actually were able to program more funding for this project in the 10-year plan in the last cycle than we originally thought. So there is $7.445 million in year of expenditure dollars for this project, which is actually more than our cost estimate was for that limited, bicycle lane phase. So we're already, I think, potentially part of the way to funding the remainder of the project based on what's currently in the 10-year plan. But it will be, we'll stay tuned for what VHB's, cost estimate is to complete the the full amount of work and see what that delta is. It's that delta, whatever the cost difference is between what we have programmed and what the complete scope of work would be, is what we would be considering in the 10-year plan. Also, in the city of Manchester, a proposal to complete an engineering study for Beach and Maple Street for active transportation purposes. If you're familiar with, so basically the limits of this would be from South Willow to Webster. If you're familiar with Beach and Maple and those corridors, they are one-way, multi-lane arterial roads. And so this engineering study would look at the feasibility of reallocating a portion of that capacity that exists today, reallocating it for active transportation of some sort, whether that be a multi-use path or a bicycle lane or some other design concept. The city has applied for federal discretionary funding under the ATIIP program, which is the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program. So Tracy, there's another acronym for you, ATIIP. So that.
Don't worry, it's the word. Exactly.
So that application is pending, but sort of as a belt and suspenders approach to this project, Manchester has requested that it be considered for the 10-year plan as well. So we'll see what the pending result is of the ATIIP application. But that's basically looking at it. This is really an engineering study at this point to see what may be feasible there. In the town of New Boston, town center improvements, I have an image on the screen here showing some improvements to Route 13 and Route 77 interchange with Meeting House Hill Road, and this is the center of New Boston's Village area. This sketch comes from a context-sensitive solutions process that was done back in 2008. That Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission and New Hampshire DOT and the town of New Boston all worked on to look at improvement needs within the village center area. I wasn't here back in 2008. I was working in a different part of the state back then on other CSS projects. But at some point after that work was completed, it never got implemented. But there remains high support for these improvements and what came out of the CSS process within the town of New Boston. So they have applied for 10-year plan consideration to make those improvements that were envisioned in the CSS process back in that time frame. And so we have assigned this project and given some of the archival information from the CSS process to VHB. And so they're going to scope and cost estimate this project, and we'll see what comes out of that. And in the town of Windham, you may remember this project. We looked at it, I believe 2 years ago. Was it as part of the CMAC program 2 years ago? It is improvements to the Windham Greenway from Meeting House and Old Mill Road to the westerly right-of-way of Interstate 93. This would be the conversion of a former railroad right-of-way to a 10-foot paved multi-use path known as the Windham Greenway. We are assigning this project to VHB. We did so last time, so we're asking them to update the scope and cost estimate for the project that they developed 2 years ago. We're also going to ask VHB to look at phasing options for the project. So the whole thing, if I go back to this screen, is somewhere around 2.25 miles. I'm going to ask VHB, given funding constraints on the regional allocation, what the cost might be to do, say, the first mile segment, and then the second mile segment, and then the crossing of the right of way. So, if it comes, and that's been a theme that I've talked about in all these projects, is looking at phasing options. we want to be able to deploy our regional allocation as widely and as beneficially to as many communities as we can and move as many projects forward as we can. These are all worthy projects. And so if there's a way to, like we did with Exit 8 last time, get a portion of a project in the 10-year plan and build upon it 2 years from now and build upon it 4 years from now, that's an advantageous approach for us. We are looking at phasing options for this. What if we could do the first mile now and then come and add to it in a later 10-year plan cycle?
Question for you about that. There's lots of discretionary grants kicking around, and once something's programmed in the 10-year plan, could like either New Hampshire DOT or the local applicant then duplicate that project scope in discretionary grants and either advance the project or provide a different funding mechanism?
Yeah, and that happens actually fairly regularly. It actually is beneficial to be in the 10-year plan because it shows planning justification for the project, and that a lot of the raise, formerly build, formerly Tiger projects that New Hampshire DOT has applied for and received over the years were large projects that were in the 10-year plan. And they use that as the basis of a discretionary grant application to either add supplemental funding to that project or diversify the funding that supports it. So yes, it generally is possible and may be beneficial to have it in a 10-year plan to strengthen the case for, the planning justification of the project.
I believe that's what happened with the northern section of the Dairy Rail Trail. It was in the 10-year plan and then it got tapped for cement.
They were happening concurrently, so there was some discussion about whether or not which would be more advantageous and get done faster. So Dairy had originally proposed that for the 10-year plan, and there was a simultaneous TAP solicitation coming, and so through conversation, it seemed one avenue would bring it to construction faster than another. So we had those conversations, but I guess the short answer to your question, James, is yes. So in summary, and I have been going for 45 minutes on the 10-year plan. I could talk a long time on the 10-year plan, but in summary, we are assigning 9 projects to VHB, and we're going to defer action on Londonderry's Route 102 Safety Improvement Project because we have strong indications that New Hampshire DOT is going to approve a road safety audit early in 2025 that would be a very strong basis for a future 10-year plan proposal for that corridor. And so my final pitch to you today is those of you who have been through previous 10-year plan cycles. We need to go through a process of evaluating these different projects according to the criteria that we have for the 10-year plan. And it's one thing for staff to be working on that by ourselves, and we do a lot of the legwork. But at the same time, what has historically worked well for us is to have a working group or a subcommittee, if you will, of TAC members to help staff evaluate those projects. And typically, we ask for disinterested TAC members who are representing communities who may not have put a project proposal in, and so, kind of have no skin in the game per se, and can be a neutral jury of your peers sort of concept there. That said, we have a lot of different communities have applied for 10-year plan projects in this cycle. So it may be more difficult to find disinterested TAC members, but if there are any volunteers to work with us and this would be what the work of this subcommittee would be doing is doing an initial set of priorities. Our final set of priorities is not due to New Hampshire DOT until around March. But in November, we need to give them a short list of priorities. And in order to develop that short list, this subcommittee is instrumental in helping us do that according to the criteria. So I would welcome any volunteers to work with us to help evaluate these projects. Again, our staff will be doing a lot of the grunt work of, what are the traffic volumes on this road and what are the safety, the crash history on this road. And, the sort of, data that needs to be crunched to help make informed decisions. But we do welcome anybody to join us and preferably those who are not representing communities that have proposed projects. And that's it for today. I'll stop sharing my screen. If there are any volunteers to work with us, please speak now or let us know after the meeting. We welcome anybody to help.
I'm always able to let new people have the opportunity to participate, but if you get short, I'll be there for you,
Thank you, Linda.
but I'd rather have the people have the opportunity.
Sure.
I can help you out, Nate.
Thank you. Thanks, Liz.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I have a question.
Yes.
In the event for some of those projects that there's, applications have been made for duplicate funding. If let's just say the Manchester Beach and Maple project gets included in the 10-year, gets included in your list of priorities that you could move forward with. And then subsequently we find out that we're awarded the ATIIP grant. Do we get the opportunity, we being the region, to backfill that gap? How does that happen?
Yeah, it would be a nice problem to have. We would in all likelihood sit down with you in New Hampshire DOT and figure out what the best path forward is for whatever we had programmed in the 10-year plan. Ideally, we would try to reserve that for some level of implementation of the project. That said, we'd have to think carefully about how we approach that. The front office really likes to have defined scopes and cost estimates. And so we would need to be able to define something fairly tangible on the implementation side that we would be able to use those dollars for. That would be but we would certainly have a conversation with the city and Bill Oldenburg, Bill Watson, maybe others within DOT to put our heads together and figure out what the best way of redeploying that funding would be. Any other questions on 10-year plan? Have I covered it all? Maybe I have. Yeah. All right, I will get out of the way now and I will yield the floor to Ben to discuss demand response transit trends.
Time do I? Oh, that's why it's time. Is this full screen online?
Yep.
All right. So what I have for today is essentially a data dump, so to say, from the year 2023 that highlights essentially where people are going throughout the region using a bunch of demand response transportation services available to them. Just a quick refresher on what demand response is. As defined by an FTA 2013 PowerPoint that I found, it's basically any non-fixed route system of transporting individuals that requires advanced scheduling by the customer, including services provided by public entities, nonprofits, and private providers. So what that means is basically you have your typical fixed route system where a bus follows like its routine scheduled route, whereas demand response is that you would call ahead to get picked up and dropped off to a specific location. And if all is eligible and all works, then that bus will come out, pick you up and take you to where you need to go. So within the region that I serve, there's 5 different services, and on a clarification of the region, I'm talking about the region that is the Southern New Hampshire Regional Coordinating Council, not the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission. I serve the RCC less than the SNHPC, which means that I serve basically all of SNHPC towns besides Francistown. And I also serve some towns that are part of Rockingham Planning Commission, which includes Salem, Atkinson, Plastow, Hampstead, Sandown, Danville, and Raymond. The 5 services that are going to be highlighted in this presentation is Atkinson Elder Services, which is provided by the town of Atkinson for its residents, basically taking passengers to wherever they need to go if they're able to fulfill that trip. There's CART, which is a part of MTA. It's a public service that brings passengers wherever they need to go within its service area, which is Chester, Derry, Hampstead, Londonderry, and Salem. There's Easter Seals, which is a nonprofit based out of Manchester, providing rides to those who are older or disabled, rides to medical appointments, grocery stores, and other essential needs. That serves Manchester, Bedford, Goffstown, and Hooksett. Wrong way. There's the MTA regional shuttles based out of New Boston, Goffstown, and Hooksett, which can bring residents of those towns anywhere within their towns, as well as trips to Bedford and Manchester for medical and shopping trips. They're available generally to the public, but they prioritize rides for those who are older and rides to medical appointments. And then the last one is Rockingham Meals on Wheels. This in the Region 8 area, it serves Atkinson, Danville, Plastow, Raymond, and Sandown, mostly providing rides to their meal centers, as well as some rides out to medical appointments and shopping trips within the Rockingham County area, not the part of Rockingham County that CART covers, so the middle and eastern part of Rockingham County. So the first part I want to highlight is, where are people going? This is information that's provided by all the 5 services I just listed, and it comes from 15,000 one-way trips in 2023, where the destination was either a non-residential location or some sort of like mixed-use downtown village center. You won't see, I didn't include trips that were taking passengers back to their home, because if I was to do that, then you would be seeing like there's like 150 shopping trips to New Boston. But those aren't people going to New Boston to go shopping. Those are people returning from shopping, going back to New Boston. And it kind of doesn't really give an accurate story, so to say, where people are going. So this is talking about, as I said, rides to either non-residential locations, shopping areas, medical centers, parks, stuff like that, or any sort of like mixed use village center. And in 2023, riders were brought to 56 different towns and cities. And the most popular ones, you have Boston, Raymond at 109 and 130, Bethune, Massachusetts at 137, Haverhill at 156. These are trips provided in 2023. Epping at 188, Hooksett at 359, Hampstead at 508, Bedford at 545, Goffstown 753, Plastow at 1,371, Manchester at 1,704, Derry at 2,073, Salem at 2,449, and finally Londonderry at 3,514 trips. And these top 14 town cities make up 95% of all those trip destinations in 2023. So these 14 out of the 53 towns, 95%. And so what's the purpose of these trips? Why are people taking these trips? Well, it should come as no surprise that medical is the top trip purpose, coming in at almost 4,900 trips, followed by shopping, which is essentially grocery stores, people going to get their food at 3,423. Work or volunteer jobs third at 1,959. Although when I say working or volunteer jobs, it's the majority of that is employment. So like, I think it's like 100 of those trips where like people go into volunteer jobs. And then personal needs or other trip purposes at 1,598. Unknown purpose, so it was never specified to me what the purpose of that trip was. Coming in at 1,342, followed by any sort of social activity, senior activities, so like events happening at local senior centers or the library, which is where other activities are usually held, coming in at 1,109. Nutrition, which is basically how Rockingham defines its rides to their meal centers at 303, followed by adult daycare at 236, and then education purposes at 114. And then this chart here just kind of shows how that's all distributed, and it should come as no surprise that medical and shopping trips make up more than half of all trip purposes. And so when we combine the towns people are going to and the purpose of the trips, we see that people going to Manchester for medical purposes is the top, as the most popular like combination of destination and trip purposes at 1,031. I won't go through this whole chart line by line, but you can see that followed by that is Salem for work trips at 882. And something to point out about all the ones that are talking about work-related trips, those are from essentially a handful of people because it's their routine, like 5 or 4 days a week work schedule. So they're getting rides from CART every single day. So that's why you see work a lot, and it's really just a handful of people. Then followed by Londonderry for medical, shopping, and unknown, and Salem for medical, and so on and so on. And these all account for 60% of all town destination and trip purpose combos. And so next I want to talk about where people are specifically going, like what places are people going to. This information comes from only 4 of the demand response providers, not all 5. That's because the town of Atkinson, when they provided their data, they only gave me towns and trip purposes. They didn't tell me like the specific address or location they were going to. So this only highlights about 11,700 trips from 2023. And it's the same formula I followed where it's not people going back to their homes, it's to non-residential locations and mixed-use village centers. And in 2023, there was 350 different specific locations that people were traveling to all across the region. And I wanted to highlight like the top 10 most common destinations. And at 10, you have the local Walmart here in Manchester. It had 373 trips to it. All of them were provided by Easter Seals, and riders were coming from within Manchester as well as Goffstown. And number 9, there's the Walmart in Derry, which was all provided by CART, 409 trips. People were coming from Londonderry, Derry, and Hampstead. At number 8, there's the Market Basket in Bedford, which I see we're now starting to see a common trend of locations. 426 trips, all of which were provided by Easter Seals.
What happened to the cars?
The cars, they were
They melted.
they were flattened in a freak accident, apparently. Riders were coming from Manchester and Goffstown. Number 7, this is a sort of like commercial shopping area on South Broadway in Salem. There were 427 trips here, all of which coming from CART. You have riders coming from within Salem as well as Derry, Hampstead, and Londonderry and Manchester. In this shopping area, it was mostly rides to the Market Basket down towards the bottom, as well as the Target about midway through. And I think one person was taking trips to McDonald's because they work at the McDonald's. And this isn't like this South Broadway commercial area. That was just how I defined it, because I put this all on like a Google Earth thing, and I had like pinpoints at every single destination. And there was a big cluster right in this area. So it just made more sense just to define it as like the South Broadway commercial area rather than just saying all these people went to this Target in Salem. And then number 6, you have more crushed cars at a grocery store. In this case, it's the Hannafords in Goffstown. 515 trips going here, provided by mostly Easter Seals, as well as 8% coming from the MTA regional shuttle in Goffstown. And riders here also coming from both Manchester and Goffstown. At number 5, you got the DaVita Dairy Dialysis Center with 519 trips coming here. This one is one of the locations that had a much more diverse set of origin destinations where people were coming from. So you had 29% coming from within Derry, 28% from Manchester. 24% from Salem, 15% from Hampstead, and 4% from Londonderry. 4, you have the downtown Derry Village Center, where there must have been some freak accident because all the buildings are apparently destroyed. This is also just like me drawing a little like area around which it pinpoints. This isn't some sort of like specific census designated village center or something like that. But 528 trips coming here, all of which were provided by CART. Majority of them at 61% being trips coming from Derry to downtown Derry, as well as 32% from Londonderry, 6% from Salem, and 1% from Manchester. That third, you have the Vic Geary Community Center down in Salem. And this is because this is where Rockingham Meals on Wheels has its meal sites, where it does its luncheons and stuff like that. Yet 815 trips coming here, of course, all provided by Rockingham Meals on Wheels, with riders coming from mostly Hampstead at 62%, followed by Sandown at 19%, Danville at 13%, Atkinson at 5%, and then Plastow at 1%, which is pretty interesting because 1% of riders are coming from Plastow to a meal center in Plastow, which I find that's pretty.
So are they having a meal at that facility, or is the meal being brought to them?
The meal is coming, they're having the meal at that facility.
Okay.
They also do meal deliveries, but these are trips that are bringing people to the Vic Geary Center. At number 2, you have the Londonderry Senior Center at 964 trips, with majority of riders coming from within Londonderry at 76%, followed by Derry at 14% and Chester at 10%. And finally, at number 1, you have this the shopping plaza on Garden Lane in Londonderry, also where the Woodmont Commons area is, at 1,118 trips, all of which also coming from CART. And at this location, you have 69% of riders coming from Derry, 21% coming from Londonderry, 8% coming from Hampstead, and 2% coming from Chester. One thing you might have noticed is that like 9 out of these 10 spots all had 100% of rides coming from one specific provider. This is because it's all part of this coordinated transportation network that we've been building here in Region 8. Because when you have an uncoordinated network, you have providers basically duplicating services, like doing the same things for one town, which is an inefficient way to like run a transportation network. And so these are all providers that are participating in the RCC and coordinating with one another. And that's why you don't have any such duplication of services. And just to round out the next, like the bottom, not bottom, but like the rank numbers 23 to 11, you can see that you've got like the Wellness Center on One Commons Drive in Londonderry, followed by the ones that say industry areas. So at 12, 13, and 19, those are all work-related trips. That's like 1 or 2 people going there like almost every day. And then there's the Tuscan Village in Salem, which is probably only going to get higher because that's still being developed and built. And then there's the Parkland Medical Center in Derry. This plaza at 45 Danville Road in Hampstead is most likely because they have a physical therapy center there. And a lot of the trips there were indicated as being medical related trips. The Market Basket in Hooksett, followed by the nursing home and Silverthorne Adult Daycare Center in Salem. And then the Crystal Avenue area, which is like just north of downtown Derry, a medical center on Cienado. Cienado. You got it. What?
Shanito.
Cienado, thank you.
Cienado.
It's they just don't pronounce towns up here like in a normal way. It's not. I'll never get it.
Trick to see if you're from here or not.
Yeah. I digress. Anyways, downtown Goffstown coming in at 22, and then the DaVita Manchester Dialysis Center. So the last thing I want to touch on is where are residents in SNHPC going? This is going to highlight all the towns within SNHPC that are served by a demand response provider. It's going to show us basically where are people going, what towns are they going to? And so for New Boston, we can see that they had 10 trips going to Bedford, which makes up 5% of their trips, and then 212 trips going to Manchester, which makes up 95% of their trips. For the town of Goffstown, we had 7 trips to Hooksett, which is less than 1%. 236 trips to Bedford, making up 22%. 307 trips going within Goffstown at 29%. And then 527 trips to Manchester coming in at 49%. For Bedford, we had only one trip going to Goffstown. 7 trips going out within Bedford, and then 89 trips going to Manchester, which makes up 92% of all their trips. For Hooksett, we had 3 trips going down to Bedford, 12 trips going up to Concord, because the MTA Hooksett shuttle will occasionally bring passengers up to Concord if they can make it work in their schedule. And then you also had 198 trips going to Manchester, which makes up 38% of all their trips. And then 308 trips going out within Hooksett, making up 59% of all their trips. For the city of Manchester, there were 3 trips going down to Salem last year, as well as 11 trips going down to Derry, 43 trips going up to Hooksett, and then 148 trips going down to Londonderry, making up 11% of their trips. 275 trips going down to Bedford, which makes up 21%. 385 trips within Manchester, which makes up 29%. And then the most common destination for Manchester residents was in Goffstown, making up 445 trips or 34%. At Londonderry, we had 143 trips going down to Salem, 176 trips going up to Manchester, 721 trips going over to Derry, making up 29%. 1,416 trips staying within Londonderry at 58%. With the town of Chester, there was only 1 trip logged to Derry, 1 trip to Manchester, and then 121 trips going down to Londonderry, which makes up, as you see, 98% of all trips out of Chester. And then the last one we have here is the town of Derry, which had 2 trips going up to Chester, 60 trips going out to Manchester, 223 trips going over to Hampstead, 532 trips, making up 16%, going down to Salem, 1,110 trips staying within Derry at 34%, and then 1,380 trips staying within Londonderry at 42%. That is, I don't have any conclusion slides, so I'll just leave it there. That's my data dump. If there's any questions or, thank you, any questions, comments, I yield the floor. Yeah, Zach.
I noticed that the 2 regional hospitals didn't really show up. Parkland was there, but I didn't see CMC or Elliott.
There were lots of,
both those have transit to go to them, but if you're in Derry, doesn't matter if there's fixed route transit going to, still have to.
Yeah, well, so CART, they do trips up to Manchester only Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then, of course, there's Easter Seals, which can provide rides to those as well. But Manchester also has its whole fixed route system and its whole step saver system as well. So a lot of trips that probably would have been provided by demand response services were probably offset by the fixed route system, the paratransit system that MTA operates, which would at least be my theory as to that. There was a lot of trips then, they just weren't in this top 23 or whatever. I think this top 23 makes up 70%, 75% of all trips that were all the 11,000 trips that I looked at.
So probably it is that less people need the medical ride than they do like they go to the medical place when they're sick, but most of the time they're okay, so that they still need to get around.
Unless it's a dialysis, which is something you have to do.
We have to go to, is there only one place, is there only one place for dialysis around here? Or is it
But
two?
one has Manchester and one.
Yeah, the Manchester one is down here. And then the Derry one right there.
So, second question is kind of either both for you or for Tracy, just is for general operations, if somebody is, in Manchester and they want to go and they call up CART to go to Tuscan Village, are they first directed to the fixed route bus?
Yes.
Before they get, okay, curious.
Then if somebody makes an appointment with the hospital and then tells the hospital they don't have a way to get there, and the hospital then hires a ride for them through Medicaid services, that trip doesn't show up here?
It doesn't, because I didn't get any rider numbers from any of the Medicaid providers.
Just an important note, we're not seeing a lot of hospital trips because they never pass through the mobility managers or the systems we work with.
Easter Seals, I think, is Easter Seals in Medicaid? Or do you know, Nate?
I don't know.
Don't know, okay. But that's probably it then. questions online? Seen any?
Mark had a question in the chat. I'm not sure if it was answered, but how we're, yep.
Yeah, this is actually something that providers actually provided to me when they gave me the data. So the way the data looks when they gave it to me, it was an Excel spreadsheet with like thousands and thousands of lines saying people were picked up at this address, going to this address in this town.
Our software.
Yep, and they all had a trip purpose identified in it. So, I mean, they all identified it differently in different ways. So I kind of had to condense it a little bit. So like social / senior centers activities / library were all 3 different trip purposes. One had like 10 different types of social trip purposes that had to get condensed and stuff like that. But either way, they all provided the trip purpose along with the trip when they provided the data with me. So this is all information coming straight from the providers. Like how the AC stopped as I stopped talking, just got dead quiet. But in that case, I thank you for giving the opportunity to let me share this, and I'll yield the floor back.
Thanks, Nate. I mean, Ben, sorry.
Ben
Thanks,
has,
Nate, anyway.
Ben has a lot more hair than me. Any TAC member updates or other business?
So we'll see you all next time since it's not a meeting. We don't.
It's not a meeting. We don't need to move to adjourn. So thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks, Nate.
Meeting.